Electronisounds Audio, the YouTube channel for you.
Hey, what's happening, guys? It's Dean from Electronisounds. Stick around. Today it's my very first tutorial for miRack. miRack is a modular synthesizer for iPad, and today we're going to get started with a very beginner-friendly tutorial. We're going to make a one oscillator synthesizer, guys. Come on, let's get into this. Before we get started today, guys, be sure and subscribe if you're into this kind of content. On this channel, I talk about everything from making music with iPad to making music with hardware. I talk about sound design, making tracks, making live jams, all that good stuff. Be sure and subscribe, guys. Before we get started, I'd like to correct a piece of false information I accidentally put in yesterday's video, the overview of this. It turns out that you do not need to be connected to the internet to use this app, only for it to store your files in the iCloud. So if you were concerned about being connected to the internet and using this app, it's actually not a concern. Sorry about that false information in yesterday's video, guys. Before we get started today, guys, I'd like to make it clear that I'm not a modular synthesizer expert and that I am definitely a modular synthesizer beginner. So if you've got a little bit more experience than that, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of new information in this tutorial today. What we are going to be doing today, guys, is building a very, very simple one oscillator synthesizer, and we're going to hook that synthesizer up to a sequencer so that we can make patterns. We're going to use a quantizer to lock the notes that are coming out of that synthesizer to a key of our choice so that we can stay in key. And that's what we're going to be building today. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to do this pretty slowly today, guys, so that you can follow along at home. We're going to start by creating a blank document inside of miRack. And the very first thing that I'm going to do is just load all of the modules that we're going to need today into the rack. And then we're going to start patching everything together. So here we go, guys. Let's start loading these modules. In no specific order, I'm going to start inserting the modules that we're going to work with today. I'll press the plus button at the top of the screen, and here we can get into either the packs section of miRack, to browse the individual modules, or we can get into the tags section and search by sort of category. The very first thing we're going to insert today is going to be a MIDI clock. We're going to need a way to set the global tempo inside of miRack. There's quite a few options here, and you'll notice that as we go, for most of the things that we're going to be inserting, there's going to be several options, and this is the beauty of modular, is which options you choose to create your setups inside of miRack. I'm going to go with this module here called clocked. We're going to go ahead and put that in as our very first module. The next thing we'll do is we're going to need a mixer to route everything today. Now, this is a section that goes from very huge, robust mixers down to, tiny little channel strips that are only going to mix a few channels together. I've been finding that I'm really into this MSC hack mixer here because it has built-in EQ, it has auxiliary sends ready to go, 4 different auxiliary sends and returns. It's a 9-channel mixer. Very, very useful and easy to work with is the key here. We're going to go ahead and insert a limiter now. So we'll press the plus button here. Now, if you're in the tag section and you click on limiter, you'll see there's 2 limiters available. The limiter I'm after is not actually listed there. It's in the Bog Audio section. And it's this one here, limiter. I guess it hasn't been added to the, or, been categorized per se to be in the tag section. We're going to go ahead and add this to the patch at this time. I'm going to go ahead and grab this. If you just touch a module at the very top, it sort of becomes disconnected from the rack. Let's see if you can see that. And then you can move the module anywhere on the rack that it would fit. I'm going to go ahead and do a slight rearrange of these modules here by just moving this over. Those of you who have been following my channel for any amount of time will probably know that I love to put a limiter on my master bus. I even have a video for this on how I do that inside of apps like Beatmaker 3. I'm constantly doing that in the app as well. I find that putting a limiter on your master bus as the very last thing in your chain, guys, is absolutely the way to go to definitely protect your ears, your speakers, and your headphones. So we're going to be inserting a limiter into our project today. Now, you don't necessarily need to set it up exactly how I'm setting it up. You don't need to use a limiter. Maybe you don't care about protecting your ears, your headphones, and your speakers. By all means, in that case, don't use a limiter. I'm kidding. Use the limiter. Anyway, anyways, let's go ahead and keep inserting modules, guys. We're going to need a quantizer, which is going to allow us to snap all of the notes today to a specific key of our choice. I'm going to go into the tags section, choose quantizer, and I'm going to choose this quantizer here from JW Modules. This is a super useful quantizer. I'm going to go ahead and put that right about there for now. I'm going to go ahead and insert an oscillator now. Let's see here. So if we're in the tag section and I go to oscillator/VCO, you'll see all these different available oscillators. What I'm looking for is, let's see here, one from this one here. This is based on the Mutable Instruments Braids oscillator. It has a lot of different waveforms in it and is capable of an immense amount of different sounds to be produced. And so I'm definitely, whoops, I didn't actually load that, guys. Just double click that and get that loaded there. Now we're going to insert an envelope. We need an adsr. We need a way that we can, you know, adjust the envelope on our synthesizer and be able to adjust things like attacks, decay, sustain, and release. So if I go into tags, envelope generator, here's an adsr. I'm going to go ahead and select that one. This one is from Bog Audio. Again, I've been finding a lot of their modules inside of miRack to be super handy. I'm going to go ahead and put this on this side of our oscillator. The way that you, you know, move your modules around and set things up is completely up to you. And that's, you know, one of the things that's going to make your sessions, you know, individual to you. We're going to need a sequencer today to sequence some notes out of this synthesizer because we're not going to be playing it by hand today. I'm really interested in the internal sequencing abilities of miRack, and I'm going to be focusing a lot on that aspect of it as I create these beginner level tutorials for you guys. We are also going to do some videos about how to get it so you can play these synthesizers that you build with your external MIDI controllers and also using like the MIDI effects inside of an app like We're going to hopefully get to that at some point as well. But for today, we're keeping everything as absolutely simple as possible. So we're going to go ahead and hit that sequencer now. We're going to be in the tag section, and I'm going to scroll down to sequencer. Quite a few options here, as you can see. I've been getting quite a bit of use out of this one here from Bog Audio. And let's see, we're going to bring this one. I'm referencing a photo that's off the screen, guys, to know which exactly modules to put in here today. Something that I set up last night, because as you may guess, I'm not really versed enough in this to just wing it by hand. I definitely need a little bit of a guide, so that's what I'm working with today. The last thing we're going to insert before we get to the patching, guys, is just a mixer, and we're going to go ahead and go to packs, and we're going to go to Bog Audio, and you can see there's quite a few devices from Bog Audio here, and we're going to choose this little Mix 1 guy, and I am going to put this right here in the rack for now. This is all of the modules that we're going to need today, guys. And let's go ahead and get started patching these together. Now, by default, when you have miRack open, it's going to be playing by default. In this case, I'm not worried about getting any audio out of this, so we're just going to hit the pause button for now. And we're going to go ahead and start routing this. Here's our limiter, and the very first thing we'll do is take an output from the limiter, and we're going to plug that into the audio out inside of miRack. So I'm going to patch from the left to the left, and I'm going to patch from the right to the right. These are just outputs, okay? Now, we're going to run an output from our mixer into this limiter, okay? In fact, why don't we go ahead and move a few things over? We'll just kind of do it this way. We're going to put our audio out. And again, this is the beauty of modular, guys, is that you can set your devices. Can't really move this easily there. There we go. Is that you can set your devices up in the rack however it makes sense to you. Let's move these over just by tapping on the header and getting it disconnected from the rack, and then you can slide it wherever on the rack it will fit. Now we're going to take an output from our mixer into the input of our threshold. And now, left to left, and we're going to patch right to right, okay? This is just guaranteeing that the threshold here is set to 0, and it's going to guarantee that our audio is not going to exceed 0 decibels. If we need to make our audio louder, we can bring the gain up as we go, and our audio is still not going to exceed 0 decibels. This is really handy, guys, so if like a really loud sound comes through, or if you start getting some, crazy, unexpected, loud sounds, this is going to prevent those from going over 0 decibels and potentially harming your ears, your headphones, or your speakers. Let's continue patching this. For today's tutorial, we're going to go ahead and leave our tempo at 120, and we're going to need to send a clock to our sequencer so it knows at what tempo to sequence the notes at. We're going to take this clock 1 here, and we're going to put that into the clock of the addr sequencer module from Bog Audio. Now, the reason that I'm taking clock 1 instead of the main clock out, you'll see in just 1 second, because I want to move this ratio here up to a 4 instead of a 1, and that's going to give us 16th notes, but I'm getting ahead of myself, and we will get there. There's another connection that I'm going to need to make to this clock, guys. I'm going to need to take our envelope, and I'm going to need to take the gate from our envelope and patch that into the clock. This is going to allow this to respond as needed. I have a little bit of difficulty explaining how the mix and the adsr exactly relate to each other, but if we go slow and you follow along, you'll be able to get this connected up, no problem, guys. We're going to take the output of our sequencer and we're going to patch that to the input of our quantizer. By default, the quantizer is set. This is like a note quantizer, so it's going to, quantize and all of your notes to a specific predetermined scale. It sets by default to the scale of C minor, but you can change this. A lot of I like to write in the key of F minor, and you could write in F mixolydian, F minor, melodic minor, major, Lydian, Locrian, Indian, harmonic minor, Dorian. It goes on like this. For now, let's just go ahead and set this to C minor for today. We're going to take the output of the voltage octave out here, and we're going to patch this in to the voltage octave in patch point here on our oscillator. We're going to take the output of our oscillator, and we're going to patch that into the input of this mixer. Okay, so again, really slow, okay? We're taking the output of the quantizer. That's just making sure our notes are in key. If you don't want to worry about the notes being in key, don't use the quantizer module, and you can just go out from your sequencer directly into the in of your oscillator. But the quantizer is going to keep our notes snapped to a scale that are coming out of the sequencer. We're taking our output of the oscillator into this level input here on the mix 1 from Bog Audio. And now what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to take the output of this mix 1 and we're going to run that into the actual mixer, okay? Modular is pretty much like a mono environment, but I'm a little bit geeky and I like to sort of take that extra cable from the right and just sort of bring that down as well. It doesn't really make a difference in the sound, I don't think, at all. It's just sort of me being, geeky. We're going to finish connecting up the envelope here. We're going to take the output of this envelope and we're going to run this into the mute input here on the mix 1. And then lastly, I think I've made one tiny mistake here. Let's see, mute. We're going to run this into level. Actually, not mute. I'm sorry, guys. We're taking the output of the adsr envelope, okay, out, and we're going to run that into level, not into mute. Mute would do, obviously, what you think it would do. It would mute that, mixer level, and we don't want to do that. adsr out into the level patch point here on the mix 1. And guys, that's it. That's all we have to do. We're officially up and running. As soon as I press play, we're going to start running this sequencer, and it's going to start spitting out notes based on these little knob controls here. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a different sound so you guys can hear a little better, and we're going to get into exploring what this what this oscillator sounds like, guys. I'm actually not going to switch to direct sound just yet because there's quite a bit of talking we'll need to do still. First thing that you'll notice is when you press play, you don't actually hear anything. And what you'll need to do is turn your, level up on the mixer channel here. And now, depending on what you're trying to achieve here, this is where we're going to need to adjust the ratio of our clock. I'm trying to achieve 16th notes on this sequencer here. And you can see at a tempo, we're at 120 today. It's more like quarter notes. So if I turn the ratio of this clock up, we start speeding up the tempo. And when I get to 4 times, now we're actually hitting 16th notes. Okay? So we can use our adsr to make some adjustments to the sound here. We can bring the sustain on the sound down, and bring the release back, bring the envelope all the way down and make it more of a plucky sound like this. Envelope is affecting the sound just as you would expect an envelope to affect the sound. And now what you can do is on the sequencer itself, you can decide, how many steps you'd like your pattern to be. This is an 8-step sequencer, and you can choose, any amount of 8 steps that you like. I was watching a video the other day from Richie Houghton, who was describing his techno setup, in his most recent techno setup, rather. And he was saying how he's really lately into 6-step arpeggios. So in honor of Richie Houghton, let's go ahead and set this to 6 steps today. We're going to go ahead and hit the play button, and what I'll do is just start moving these knobs, which is going to change the pitch that we're sending out on each of these steps. And you'll hear how that affects the sound. I think for today's tutorial that'll work just fine. So this is spitting out random voltages which are controlling the notes of this oscillator. Well, not random, I mean we're controlling the voltages by which direction and how much we move these knobs, but it's snapping those to a scale now, and the scale is C minor. And if you turn that up just a little so you can hear it home. So if you were to change the scale, you can hear how it's, gonna snap those to the scale. What we'll do, guys, is we'll start exploring with this oscillator at this time. So for instance, this is just a saw wave, but if you scroll the edit, you can scroll through a whole bunch of different included waves to this oscillator. You can mess with the tuning of those waves, with the coarse tuning, with the fine tuning of those, and then the controls that are really, I'm just going to pause that for a sec, the controls that are really going to give you some interesting shaping over your tone are going to be this timbre and this color controls here. We're not going to worry about learning anything about FM today. We're just going to scroll through some of these oscillators, maybe change up the pattern a bit, and I'd like to show you just the range of sounds that you can get out of an oscillator like this one here. This is just a 1 oscillator setup with a simple sequencer. We're not using any effects, we're not using any filters, we're not using delay, reverb, any filters, any of that type of stuff at all. We're just going to hear the raw sound and the amount of different sounds that you can get out of an oscillator like this. I'm going to switch over to direct sound real quick, guys, and we're going to explore some of these waveforms inside of here. Just one quick note before I switch to direct sound. If you're finding that when you're interacting with this, if things maybe aren't responding the way that you expect them to be responding, see how this isn't changing? What's typically the reason behind that is because it's not playing. If you have it playing, it seems to always, work as expected. Just something to keep in mind, guys. I'm really impressed with the range of sounds that we can get out of this one oscillator alone. Imagine if we built a 3-oscillator synthesizer or a 4-oscillator synthesizer using 3 or 4 of these oscillators, or maybe 3 or 4 different oscillators. You can substitute the other oscillators inside of miRack for this in a setup exactly like this and experiment with the other oscillators and getting different sounds and tones out of miRack. We'll be checking back in with more tutorials very soon, guys, where I'll be expanding this setup. We'll be adding effects and exploring FM synthesis and exploring modulating some of these controls. I hope you guys have found this useful, and until next time, thanks for watching.